The Iraq War was America's neoconservative war, the first phase of an ambitious plan to use U.S. power to spread freedom and democracy in the Middle East and beyond. But that was then. 5 years on, who's listening to the neocons now? My guest today is a British writer who's made it his mission to bring muscular, moral neoconservatism across the Atlantic. But is this a worldview that can win over Europe? Douglas Murray, welcome to Hardtalk.
Good to be with you.
Would you accept that neoconservatism is fundamentally an American mindset, American ideology?
No, not at all. It's become most famous for its American proponents. We think of neocons as being people around the White House and all this sort of thing involved with the Iraq War, various cliches that have been doing the rounds for some years now.
But going back to its foundation, it was born in America.
The most prominent forefathers of it were American, that's true. But then neocons also look to non-American figures. There are people like the late French philosopher Jean-François Revel, who's much lauded by neoconservatives, and even Margaret Thatcher gets mention in the annals.
But I suppose I begin this way because I want to ask you whether it is easy to imagine Europe embracing a philosophy which seems more than anything else to be founded on an American view of what is morally superior and also an American might, an American power.
Well, I think on the issue of moral assertiveness, it's true that Europeans aren't all that good at doing that at present. It's quite hard to persuade Europeans that there's anything all that great about themselves, or that indeed there's anything that's good about them which they'd want other people to share in. One of the great things about America, to my mind, is the fact that the American Revolution doesn't stop at, and hasn't stopped at, America's own borders. It's a sort of extraordinary historical one-off, a nation that doesn't say, well, we've got liberty, democracy, freedom here, and that's all right, I'm all right, Jack. They don't say that. They do believe, a lot of Americans believe, that even if they don't forcefully help other people to get there, they should do what they can to ensure that the American ideals of freedom, which I believe are universal ideals of freedom, don't stop just at America's borders.
But you only addressed the first part of my question there, which was about the moral assertiveness and superiority.
Yeah.
But it's also the question of might and power and who has it. And ultimately, the United States from the 50s, when the key sort of founders of philosophy were writing their important works through to the present day, it's America that has the might.
It's true, and it's true that if you're a European and you don't have many armies, it's good to find reasons not to use those armies. You can justify your non-spending on defense by saying that you didn't need it anyway. I think that's a mistake.
Sorry to interrupt, but when you therefore come to propound neoconservatism for Europe, you're essentially saying to Europeans, you have to buy into the notion of tying yourself to Washington and to U.S. military power.
No, you don't have to tie yourself to it by any means. I mean, one of the things that I do advocate and would continue to advocate is that Europeans, including Brits, have to step up on military spending. You can't have the situation we currently have with European nations nudging under 2% and boasting when they nudge above 2% of their spending on military power. I think you end up in the situation we're currently in, which is that even in relatively small-scale conflicts like Afghanistan, nations like Holland and Germany find themselves stretched, deeply stretched, in conflicts which, in the universal scale of things, will look fairly small.
You have written that neoconservatism centers on, and I'm quoting, natural right, moral clarity, and exporting what is good in our culture. Natural right, what do you mean by that?
Natural right stands opposite to the prevailing trend of certainly European philosophy, which is relativism. It's the idea that no single thing is better than another. There are just different ways of looking at the world. So if I believe in democracy and freedom and the rule of law, and you don't, you believe in entirely different systems, you believe in authoritarianism and so on, then we will just agree that that's just another way of looking at things, and who would I be to tell you that dictatorial families or crime-syndicate inherited dictatorships like that of Iraq shouldn't just continue? Who am I to say that? Well, I think there are certain things, and natural right is the normal way of asserting this.
I'm sure you would accept that if I was sitting with a key thinker or politician in the Islamic Republic of Iran right now, They would say to me, I believe absolutely that the Islamist philosophy that our government propounds is based on natural right, moral clarity, and exporting what is good in our culture. They would say just the same.
I don't think they would. I think that somebody from the clerical council in Tehran would probably tell you that their laws and their ideas were based on the Quran or on revealed Islamic doctrine. That's quite a different thing from natural right. That's believing in a divine dictation.
Well, it's different. I take your point, but it's not different in the sense that it's not something one can argue about. You either buy into it or you don't, just as one buys into your view of what is absolutely non-relatively right, or you don't. No, there it sits. It is your view, and you're not going to change it.
To believe in, to go along with what you say, there are two problems with it. Firstly, as I say, I don't think you would find an Islamic leader who said that that their version of the world was natural, right? They would say that they believed in the revealed philosophy of Islam.
As I said, you can make that point to me, but I come back to my bigger point, which is that just as you have a fundamental set of beliefs, so do they. And what we see is a clash of fundamental beliefs which are not open to discussion, compromise, or shades of grey. It's a recipe for eternal confrontation.
No, I don't think it is. The thing about this clash, which you say, I mean, it's the thing that's on a lot of people's lips. I don't believe in the clash of civilizations. I don't think it's happening. I don't think it need happen. The clash between what you call two different fundamentalisms, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that it's wrong to be, as it were, fundamentalist, as you'd say, about the ideal of democracy. I don't think it's fundamentalist to believe that all people across the globe should have a say in the way in which their countries are governed. I don't think it's fundamentalist. I don't think it's equally fundamentalist to say, if a mullah says and is fundamentalist about their right to rule people under a dictatorship, I don't think it's fundamentalist of me to say, actually, I think people should have a say in their future.
But of course, I just come back with Hardtalk from Russia. I've spoken to a lot of leading Russians who talk about democracy. Their use and meaning of the word is entirely different from that currently used in the United Kingdom. For them, it's democracy. So when you bandy around words like democracy, from the very beginning, you are into a very complex. It is not simple.
No, the Russians, of course, it's not simple. But the Russians that you're speaking to presumably have jumped onto the bandwagon, much like Russia has to some extent jumped on the notion of a war on terror to execute its own, I think, extraordinary and barbaric policy in Chechnya. There are people all over the world who will seize on what they consider to be the in words of the moment and use them to excuse their own manner. There's no doubt about it that what Russia has and what some of the Russians you've been speaking to have been proposing is not democracy as we see it. Just because they use a word in a bad sense doesn't mean the word is tainted.
All right, let's talk about Iraq, because if one is talking about the relevance of neoconservatism today, one cannot escape an important discussion about Iraq. Did Iraq, and has Iraq given you pause in your pursuit of neoconservatism?
Well, look, I'm not pursuing neoconservatism. I'm not trying to turn the world into neoconservatism.
Well, you sort of are pursuing it. You're trying to persuade. I mean, this book is trying to say, and indeed it says it on the cover, neoconservatism, why we need it. I explain why,
as a philosophy, I think it's the right way of looking at the world. I don't think that people are neocon. It's not like, I mean, people use the term neocon as if it's a sort of breed. I mean, it's just a way of looking at the world. It's an attitude, like some people have a liberal attitude.
Well, I say a mindset.
It's a mindset. It's fine. It's a way of looking at it.
Let's agree on that.
So Iraq, look, I mean, when it comes to Iraq, first, I mean, the issue that you describe it as being a neoconservative war. If it actually was a neoconservative war, more so-called neoconservatives would have been involved. The highest any identifiable neocon came in the Bush administration was Paul Wolfowitz.
You describe it as a perfect neoconservative war.
I'd say ideologically, absolutely. But it wasn't neoconservatives who drove the war or who ran the war or who run the aftermath of the war. So it's not a neoconservative run war, even if it's one that most neoconservatives were sympathetic to.
Indeed. I mean, you may dispute whether he's a neoconservative. He, for a time, appeared to sympathize with most tenets of neoconservatism. He's walked away from it. Francis Fukuyama, a respected American historian. He says, fundamentally, the neoconservatives got it wrong. The idea that freedom and democracy can be achieved by the use of hard power, he now says, is wrong.
Look, Fukuyama's not got much right in his career. And it's not surprising he's got this one wrong too. Look, first of all, Fukuyama, who always sees on by people as being the great example of somebody who's put up his hands and said, no, we were wrong. Actually, Fukuyama's general point now, if he has one, is that the tenets of neoconservatism has been misunderstood in the case of Iraq. I think that I think the Fukuyama...
Forgive me, but having read what he's written about his current thinking, his key point is that the neoconservatives overestimated and misjudged the import and the effectiveness of military power.
Look, it's true that in the case of Iraq, some people, and you can always find somebody who does it, some neocons were more optimistic than perhaps they should have been about it. I think that Fukuyama is wrong, and it's certainly contradicting a lot that he's said in other parts of his career.
Well, that's because he's learned from experience, surely.
I'm not sure he has. Look, Fukuyama's main belief in his first book, The End of History, talks about the idea, and it's an idea I hold as well, that the end of history, as it were, the final point society should get to, and ought to get to, and ought to be helped to get to, is one in which representative government, rule of law, and all these things exist in. And when you achieve that, then the struggles against totalitarianism and so on are over. There are other struggles, but that main one's over. I disagree with Fukuyama when he says that the use of force, or if he is saying, and he has come near it, the use of force is always going to lead to this problem. Look, the use of force was vital in overthrowing the totalitarianism that ruled Japan until 1945. It was force that was able to bring democracy in the end to Japan. You could have spent several more hundreds of years fighting some kind of war which was not involving hard power, but I think hard power there was necessary. I think hard power was necessary to bring democracy and accountability to Afghanistan. Is it perfect? Is it just only a democracy? Of course not.
Well,
but it's nearer that than it ever was going to be under the Taliban.
Patently not.